up. It's all dark and horny at 12 o'clock.
Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is directed by Gil Kenan, and it's the newest Ghostbusters movie to hit theaters. Obviously, it's called Ghostbusters, but Ghostbusters goes all the way back to the 80s. I'm a huge fan of the original two Ghostbusters movie, and I liked the Ghostbusters Afterlife movie that came out a couple years ago, and this movie does a good job blending those two styles. It brings back Ghostbusters from the original movies like Bill Murray, Ernie Hudson, and Dan Aykroyd, while keeping a main focus on the newer family of Ghostbusters, starring Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, McKenna Grace, and Finn Wolfhard. That's really the main focus of this movie. And since we're talking about the main focus, let's get into the synopsis. This movie centers around that new family of Ghostbusters, busting ghosts, doing what Ghostbusters do best in New York City. They are all living in the Ghostbusters firehouse. That was really cool as well. But this opens with them chasing down ghosts, and they kind of wreck New York City while they're doing it. And the Ghostbusters have always done that, and the city's always turned a blind eye to it. But this time they have an evil mayor who wants to shut down the Ghostbusters once and for all. And so he finds the fact that Phoebe, played by McKenna Grace, is a minor, and he uses that against them, and so they have to stop her from going after ghosts. So then the movie takes a hard turn and basically becomes a story about Phoebe, the little girl from Afterlife, as she's trying to navigate her way through this world where her family won't let her help bust ghosts, but she knows how to bust ghosts, and so she kind of tries to do things on her own and ends up unlocking an ancient evil. And this ancient evil is so threatening that it brings together the old Ghostbusters and the new Ghostbusters. Now that's the best synopsis that I can give you. If that sounds like an interesting time at the theater, well, you should go check this movie out because it's currently playing in theaters. I saw this movie in Dolby Surround Sound, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of this movie, oh my God, seeing it in Dolby was so much fun. I just love how loud that theater can get. I don't have a Dolby theater around my house, so anytime I'm traveling and I have a Dolby theater, you know I gotta check it out. So highly recommended in Dolby if you've got one near you. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. First positive right off the bat, this was in my YouTube short that I released right out of the theater, and that is that it's cool to see the Ghostbusters busting ghosts once again in New York City. There's just something cool about that. There's something that calls back to those original two movies when you're busting ghosts in New York City. In Afterlife, it was cool seeing them bust ghosts, but I think they were in Oklahoma, and they explained that away through the plot, but it's just something weird about having it based in Oklahoma and not in the heart of New York City, where everybody kind of turns a blind eye because, hey, it's New York City. It's the Turtles in New York City. It's ghosts in New York City. Who cares? Like, there's literally a line in the original TMNT movie where Raphael flies over a taxi cab and the guy in the back seat goes, "What the heck was that?" And he says, "It looks like a turtle in a trench coat. You're going to LaGuardia, right?" Like, there's something cool about New York City just being numb to it in the 80s and 90s, and so this movie kind of plays into that. I really like that a lot. Next like I have for this movie has to be the comedy. Now, most of it is brought by Paul Rudd or Camille Nanjiani. Both of them have great comedic timing. If you've seen either of them in anything before, you already know that, but it's something that they bring into this movie where a lot of the characters bring the serious tone. Even the villain, in past Ghostbusters movies, the villain's sort of a laughable ghost or laughable villain. But in this movie, it is very serious, very dark. It's popping people's heads at the beginning of the movie. So it's a dark, monster, godlike entity. Whereas in the past, most of the ghosts have been sort of comedic in tone. So when you get that comedic in tone, Paul Rudd or Camille Nanjiani, it helps the movie and it's enjoyable. They're really the only ones who bring it, which is kind of sad because Bill Murray's in this movie and I know he has great comedic timing. I know he can bring the comedy. Unfortunately, he only has one funny line in the movie and that line was already in the trailer. So while I thought it was okay, and the people I saw this movie with didn't see the trailer yet and they thought it was hilarious, that's really his only line. So I do feel he was a little underutilized, but we'll get to my negatives in a minute. As far as the positives go, this movie was funny, and if you enjoyed the humor in Afterlife, it brings that kind of humor once again. And my final positive for this movie is going to be hit of nostalgia that I got, not only throughout this movie, but the very end of this movie. There's something about the triumphant Ghostbusters outside the firehouse in New York City where all the people of New York City are rallying behind them like, yeah, Ghostbusters, who are you gonna call? And that iconic Ghostbusters music that's playing. I loved that in this movie. That was one of my favorite moments in this entire movie. And while I do have issues with the movie, and we're about to get to my negatives, just those little hits of nostalgia, I know those were always trying to get you through this movie, and that can be a negative sometimes, but I like that because, again, I'm a huge fan of the original Ghostbusters movie. I actually went and saw Ghostbusters re-released in a drive-in theater back in 2020 when all the theaters were shut down. I actually did a whole vlog for that here on my channel. You can check that video out now if you want. It's just me and my wife going to see Ghostbusters at a drive-in. It was a fun time. I enjoyed making that video. That's my final positive. Let's move on to the negatives. First negative I have, this is the one from my YouTube short. I try to put one positive, one negative in my YouTube shorts so that you get a quick reaction from me out of the theater. So my negative is going to be the pacing of this movie. It's kind of all over the place. I wrote down slow-paced movie, but it wasn't that it was slow-paced because it was building a story. It's just the pacing is off. It opens big, it ends big, but everywhere in the middle, it'll have like, oh, we're gonna get somewhere now, and then let's tone it back. Oh, we're gonna get somewhere, let's tone it back. And it takes its time. And then at the very end, in the last act, they just throw everything at the wall. And so the pacing feels kind of off the way they do that. Now, I'm not saying that makes for a horrible movie at all. I had an enjoyable experience, but just the pacing of this movie is one of those factors that's gonna stop me from going back to the theater to watch this again, and it may stop me from multiple viewings in the future. Like, I'll watch this again in the future, but it's like Ghostbusters Afterlife. The pacing of this movie just feels like it drags on a bit too much, whereas if you watch that original Ghostbusters, it's scene. The ending is spectacular, but you're kind of expecting it to be a crazy marshmallow man in the streets because of how this movie has gone. Whereas in this movie, it's very toned back until the end where they throw everything at the wall. My other negative for this movie is that it does become the Phoebe movie. I talked about that a little bit earlier. It does become the Phoebe and the Ghostbusters movie, and just something about not having everyone in this movie getting a full arc kind of bothered me because they were able to do that in Ghostbusters Afterlife. I knew what was going on with Paul Rudd. I knew what was going on with the mom. I knew what was going on with her brother, played by Finn Wolfhard. I knew what was going on with McKenna Grace. Like, all of them had an arc in that movie, and all of them had a satisfying end. Whereas in this movie, Finn Wolfhard just kind of plays a kid who's there. Like, they needed a brother, and they're like, well, we already had him in the first movie, let's just bring him back. People will recognize his face, he'll bring him back, he'll be in this movie. We'll have him do some things with Slimer, but we don't really know what to do with him because this movie's really about Phoebe. And when you have an entire Ghostbusters movie and you frame it around one character instead of framing it around all of the Ghostbusters, that kind of bothers me. So I don't have a problem with McKenna Grace's performance here, and I liked the story they gave us with her, but the fact that everybody else took a back seat and she got a front seat, it didn't work for me. I wish more people had gotten a more satisfying story throughout this movie. In fact, I think Kumail Nanjiani gets a bigger story than most of the Ghostbusters in this movie, and that bothered me too, because again, it's not anything against his performance. I even put him in the positives for bringing the comedy, but it's a Ghostbuster movie. I should be able to see something or a big portion of all of the Ghostbusters in this movie. And instead you get a front and center on Phoebe, and you get a front and center on Kumail Nanjiani to advance the story, but overall, all the other characters just take a backseat. That leads me to my final negative of this movie, and that is that the OG Ghostbusters, maybe not Dan Aykroyd, but Ernie Hudson and Bill Murray for sure, just feel like they're going through the motions. And that's too bad because you've got two of the most iconic Ghostbusters in your movie, and they're just kind of there. Ernie Hudson's like, oh yeah, I own the firehouse, I'm in the scene, that's right. And then Bill Murray, oh man, he looks like he was collecting a paycheck on this one. He gave one really funny line, and it's like, maybe, I think Bill Murray might have thought that line up, but every other piece of dialogue that he has, even the end, there's someone else that calls the mayor dickless. Like, that was Bill Murray's line. He should have said that front and center, but somebody else in the crowd calls the mayor dickless, and Bill Murray's like, I gotcha. And it's weird too, because at the very end of the movie, they're all partying in the street and everybody's saying something, kind of cuts to Bill Murray, and he's just like, they didn't think dialogue was the right idea for Bill Murray. And I don't know, maybe it was in his contract. He's like, I'm going to give 10 lines and I'm out. I'm here for a paycheck. Maybe that was it. But it was just weird that you get Bill Murray front and center in the last act of this movie and he gives one good line. And then the very end where he should be talking about, we came, we saw, we kicked its ass. And instead you get, give him a line. He's Bill Murray. He's a Ghostbuster. He's the Ghostbuster, in my opinion. Give him a line. No, okay. And I get the passing of the torch too. There's gonna be people that are like, oh no, they were passing the torch. I get that. But He's Bill Murray. You have him in your movie. He's a Ghostbuster. He's the Ghostbuster. Give him a line. No? Okay. And so that bothered me too. So I'm not trying to be overly negative on this movie or in any movie review that I do, but it's just those are the things that really stood out and bothered me. Those are the things that are going to hurt repeat viewing in the future. Overall, I'll say that if you enjoyed Afterlife, if you enjoyed the new characters of Ghostbusters from that movie, then I think you'll enjoy Frozen Empire. If you're a big fan of watching these big spectacle ghost-like movies on the big screen, you should go check this movie out in theaters. If Ghostbusters Afterlife wasn't really your cup of tea, you're a bigger fan of the older movies, you might want to wait for this one on streaming or on physical media. But with that said, those are just my thoughts because that's my review for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Guys, have you seen Ghostbusters Frozen Empire yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below where you think we agree or disagree. Maybe you've got different thoughts. Maybe you've got comments. Hey, listen, this might not have been my cup of tea, but it might be yours, and I'd love to hear about it. And finally, guys, if you like this review and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Ghostbusters Frozen Empire movie review, and I had a good time making this. I had a good time going to see this, saw it with some coworkers. We had a fun time watching it. I got the Ghostbusters, I'm gonna cover myself up here. I got the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire popcorn bucket. It's just the trap, and it's got some weight to it. I'm gonna do a YouTube short for this on my channel, so if you want to check that YouTube short out, you can. And if you want to check out any of the other videos on my channel, well, I've got all of my 2023 movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.